Hi, welcome everyone. This is the fourth in the four-part series of mapping our road to recovery with the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay. And my name is Liz Reichert. I'm your facilitator today, along with a number of other people on the team who you'll get to hear about. And I'm here with Roz Morrison, who is our chair of the Institute. And Roz, maybe I'll let you just welcome everyone as we go.
Well, I really appreciate everyone joining in. So far, we've got about 24 people on the call and counting. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we're up to at the Institute. I have the privilege of chairing the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay. It's a fairly young organization. And our mission and vision is to really harness the power of everyone in this region and this beautiful place and become together the smartest, greenest, healthiest, and most caring region in the province. So that's a fairly big aspiration, but I know with all of us working on it, it's achievable. I want to tell everyone a little bit more about what we're up to today. Working together towards a more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable future, we're here to explore some of the themes and action items that have surfaced in recovery plans across the region. Our biggest opportunity today is to really talk about and identify how we can collectively align objectives and then pool resources and accelerate the action towards building back better through this pandemic and beyond, and do things together that have never been done before. We've heard some key themes in this Road to Recovery series. And now together, we'd like to identify the key actions that can help move the Institute forward and the whole region of Southern Georgian Bay. So I'm often asked, what is the geographic footprint of the region? And generally, we say that it's right across Southern Georgian Bay, so including Meaford and Grey Highlands, the Blue Mountains, Collingwood, Clearview, and Wasaga. And we are so very fortunate to have attracted talent from as far away as Owen Sound and Midland. So today, let's identify specific next steps that we could take as an institute and as a region of our wonderful communities together. So Liz, I think that you'll just let us know a little bit about the webinar format.
Sure. So the things to keep in mind today, we are in webinar format, which means that the people who you can see will be joining as members of our panel or as our facilitation team, and we're going to introduce them all to you in just a minute. As participants, you can join in the chat, and I already see we've got quite a few postings coming up, people saying hello. I do want to remind people that when you chat, join the chat, you can type into the box at the bottom of the column. So along the bottom of your screen, you'll see the little bubble saying chat. Click on that. That should open a chat bar to the right of your video screen. And there you'll see whatever messages have already been posted. Right at the very bottom, there's a clicking icon there, and you can type in there your message and post to everyone. Right above where you type, there's a little blue line that says either to all panelists, or if you choose the little drop-down window, drop-down arrow beside all panelists, it'll say all panelists and all attendees. And we would really encourage you to post to all panelists and all attendees in everything that you're sharing. It allows us to save the chat record. If you only post to all panelists, that's not saved in the chat. We'll do our best to try and catch if someone does that by mistake. But for the most part, we're really hoping that everyone will post to all. So hopefully that works. And we're going to move in a moment to have people actually respond to some questions in the chat. But just before we do that, I think we're going to introduce people, right, Roz?
Yes.
Let me just do my screen share. I know you did the purpose of the meeting, and that was the first slide. So I'm going to screen share up those slides. Here they are. Okay. So that's the first slide. And you already covered most of these items. I think we'll move to the next slide. Are you okay with that, Roz?
I'm good.
All right, on to the next one. So do you want to do the introductions?
Yes, the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay can only work well if we're working together. And we are so fortunate to have an extraordinary group of people who are working on this series, Mapping Our Road to Recovery. We've developed a design team exclusively for this purpose, which includes the facilitation team, who includes Liz Reichert, who's been chatting with you. Liz is a systems change facilitator working on complex problems. Also Marilyn Struthers, who's giving us a wave. And Marilyn is a longtime resident of Gray and Bruce, who works with emerging practices in the social sector as a facilitator and a researcher, a funder, and an organizational development coach. And Christy Deer. Christy is the owner and brewmistress of Collingwood Kombucha Company, and she freelances as an integral facilitator. So thanks to the three of you for helping us facilitate these sessions. In addition, we have Institute board members, Susan Cook, Nancy Griffin, Yvonne Hamlin. We also have a wonderful talent pool, including Jody Kennedy, Andrew Palmer, June Porter, Jeff Shear, and Brandon Houston. So thanks to the entire design team. And the Institute doesn't do anything without collaborative partners. We are a big believer in collaboration, and we'd like to thank our partners, Town of Collingwood, who was with us from the very beginning. Thank you, Collingwood. On the Bay Magazine and the New Classical 102.9 FM. Municipality of Meaford, and our most recent partner, the Township of Clearview. So it's a growing collaboration, and we are very happy to be working with all of you. Thank you so much. Just want to tell you a little bit about the agenda for today. We're going to open it with Liz speaking with you, participants, and engaging the panelists with questions so that we can get everybody involved. And participants, we want to say thank you for your comments. We've heard you, and we want this particular session to be much more conversational, so feel free to type away in the chat room. We then move to having the panel present some slides as speaking points, and then we'll move into a series of questions that we've shared with the panelists, and we will be sharing with you as we go. And again, we encourage all of you to participate together. And most importantly, this is our opportunity. This is our final event in the Mapping Our Road to Recovery series. It's our opportunity to identify next steps, specific action items for working together and moving forward.
Okay, thanks, Roz. I'm going to stop the screen share here and move us back to our other format. I'm just going to open the chat window so I can see that. Okay. Oops. There we go. All right. So thank you. That was terrific. And I think we're all set now to go with our opening questions. And so in order to do this, we will, Marilyn and Christy are going to post the question over into the chat. And as panelists and participants, we're going to have a conversation while you all are responding in the chat. So this is our first time trying this. We'll see how it goes. And so I'll start off by saying, you know, in our last session, a number of the participants who were presenting, the panelists who were presenting, talked a lot about how their organizations are now working differently as a result of COVID, and also how they themselves were working in some different ways, which was very interesting. And they were, you know, really thinking about what practices they want to make sure they retain going forward. It's kind of inconsistent with that, how we're thinking about how can we build that better post-COVID. So the question for you today is, what have you noticed about how you're working in your community or in your organization differently? And perhaps how are you connecting, or how are you thinking about the work of community in this time of post-COVID? So just to repeat that, what have you noticed about how you're working in your community or your organization differently? So I'll open that up for conversation to our panelists and facilitators if you want to jump in today in that conversation. And don't forget to unmute yourselves before you start. So anyone can open up in the conversation. Any reflections on that, what you've noticed about how you're doing things differently?
Well, Liz, I'd be happy to start if you like.
Okay, that's great, Shirley, thanks.
I'm Shirley Keaveney, Deputy Mayor of the Municipality of Meaford, and we have an emergency management control group that has been in place since the middle of March. And what's interesting is that usually emergencies are short-lived. They're weather-related, tornadoes, floods, ice storms, etc. But since this one has gone on now for 3 months, it's been quite interesting to see the transition between that group being in control of the actions of the municipality as council was not meeting until about 6 weeks ago when council began to meet via Zoom, and how communication has flowed between the two groups and out into our community, which is we're constantly working on and improving and recognizing that communication is really key during an emergency situation, and what are the best ways to manage that, from newsletters to utilizing our digital newspaper to getting on the radio, and how important it is to really talk face to face so that people understand what we're doing. And anyway, I'm sure others would like to jump in on that.
That's great. Thanks very much, Shirley. What else? What else? Sure, David.
Yeah, my name is David Green. I'm past chair of Georgian Triangle Lifelong Learning Institute and founding member of the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay. And with the Lifelong Learning organization, which has been around for 24 years and typically does live lectures to approximately 400 people, the big change we had, of course, was switching to online in terms of delivering live lectures. That was a challenge, although we had started doing it almost a year ago anyway, to expand our reach to a larger audience because we're limited in physical space. So the big difference for us was going to an audience of predominantly the adult senior generation who were attending our lectures, to who were typically not fully embracing, shall we say, technology in terms of online and video and what have you. But as soon as we switched over and people had to do it, the interesting thing was suddenly people embraced it and enjoyed it. And we found that we were streaming a number of lectures to hundreds of people, and they were quite enjoying it and able to do it, of course, from the comfort of their home. So the one big difference for us is, A, we had to switch to technology and go online when a lot of those members typically liked the socialization aspect was a big part of it. In this case, they weren't getting that, but they suddenly had to embrace the technology, and now we're finding in our post-event surveys that they're more interested and might consider, in fact, want to do more streaming, and rather than having to attend live, maybe sit around and have your coffee and your jammies while you watch it. So that's one big change for us, and we're obviously considering that for the future.
It'll be interesting to see how maybe there's going to be some hybrid opportunities going forward when and if people can get back together, what that might look like. And because obviously socialization is a big part of that. Okay. Who else would like to go?
Hey, Liz, we have some comments so it looks like some of our not-for-profits like the United Way and the Out of the Cold programs are really looking for more collaboration. They're reacting a lot more quickly. There's some comments around technology and how it's allowing people to work from home and not have too much disruption in their workflow. There's some comments around seniors and ensuring that they have the ability and strategies in order to, participate with things online and engage with online technologies. Yeah. So thanks everyone for that in the chat.
Thanks for sharing that, Christy. That's great. Shirley, just a sec. I'm just going to check in first before see if Kathy, I think, was going to comment, and then I'll circle back to you. Kathy,
Yes, I can
welcome.
comment thank you, from the charity sector. Just so that you understand where I'm coming from, Beaver Valley Outreach is a grassroots organization that's independent from any other organizations. It's a registered charity. And our goal is to make good things happen in our community, which is the town of the Blue Mountains and some of the surrounding area. And we do this by running 18 different programs and services. We employ 19 people, mostly in our childcare sector, and we have over 300 volunteers, many of whom are the seniors that were just being talked about. So we do provide many of the social services in our area, and we do try to partner, collaborate, but we can go it alone when we need to. So you can imagine that this just turned us completely upside down, because first of all, there was a great need in our community for exactly the services that we provide. But at the same time, our major source of funding, which is our treasure shop, had to close. And our other major source of funding, which was fees from our children's programs, we run a daycare center and various other programs for children, and day camps and summer camps. Well, all of those disappeared, but we still had our 19 employees, and we did manage to keep them on the payroll. So the task for us was to keep all of these people engaged, to have our staff completely change, because they were trying to provide online support for parents whose children were at home running around, and you know, giving them activities that they could do. We were concerned with isolation on the part of seniors, because most of our volunteers are of that age, which were the vulnerable population, and so we needed programs for them. And we also wanted to make sure that there wasn't a lot of duplication of services, and that's one of the probably main things that came out of our recovery task force, was the importance of communication and having groups work together rather than individually trying to do things and not making the most efficient use of resources. So I'll just stop there.
Okay, that's great. Shirley, were you going to pipe in?
Thanks, Liz, and I wasn't just taking in the comments that have come through the attendees today, and recognizing how important internet is, and the fact that in rural areas such as ours, we have some residents with no internet at all, and others with dial-up, and very big challenges in terms of children trying to do their schoolwork from home and so on. So I do think COVID has brought an awareness to the need to increase bandwidth within our rural communities, and I'm just pleased that the province is recognizing that now and stepping forward and acknowledging that this is a problem and that it has to be funded and addressed in short order.
That's right. One of the things from our very first session was a comment that someone came in through the chat, actually, using the quote from Leonard Cohen about cracks are where the light gets in. And that idea that COVID has been like the crack. That's really showed how some of the systems are working, but where they aren't working, and where those gaps are. But in fact, sometimes it's more serious than a gap. It really is a crack, and that needs to really be attended to. So I'm going to just check in on the time here and see, also looking to Marilyn and Chrissy, any additional comments you want to share on the chat?
Yeah, Liz, Kathy from the Beaver Valley Outreach just mentioned that, you know, the funding has also changed, and some of their task force points are in need of some more efficient resources. And there's lots of chat comments about the cracks and how organizations have had to really look at those cracks, like you just mentioned, and pivot into, you know, an online economic model. And yeah, is there anything else that you're seeing, Marilyn?
I noticed a couple of posts of people who are using the opportunity to do online learning to foster the business skills that they want, or business planning. And the sort of really interesting idea that I think it's from Julie Scarcella, if I'm saying that correctly, that really it's an opportunity to move forward in ways that her business had already intended to move. But now's the imperative to take it forward.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, that's our opening question. Oh, sorry, David, were you going to ask something?
Oh, just a very quick point. I think on that point about access to the online courses for everybody, in the case of the demographic we're with, what we've discovered is a lot of people have found many more options now, of course, because they are online more to access information and learn and so on. This generation. So it's interesting that we don't know what that might mean in the future in terms of either competition or alternative sources for information when people get comfortable with the technology. So in the business world, it applies, but certainly also in this whole area of lifelong learning. So just
that's great. Great observation. It'll be interesting to see how that starts to unfold and whether we've unleashed a whole new opportunity for that population. It's really
a lot more bandwidth.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Roz, I realized one of the things I didn't do with the slides was do the introduction of our panelists.
Didn't they do a beautiful job? Most of them introducing themselves.
My apologies for that.
I'm just going to do a couple of things. I just wanted to briefly talk about the emerging themes that have come through these 3 sessions so far, because these sessions are not disparate. These sessions are interconnected. The comments about business are the same comments the nonprofit charities are making. So we're trying to help all of us understand better how interconnected everything really is, and to remind ourselves what we can work on together, because, you know, through these events, we've curated an enormously talented speakers pool, many of whom have agreed to join a leadership group, a regional leadership group like we've never had before, with representation from those 4 different sectors: business, nonprofit, charity, government, and philanthropy. And so together, these are the big ideas, the themes that have emerged for action. And one is an arts and culture strategy. And I just want to say that a lot of action has taken place on that. On May 27th, we had 40 people put up their hands and say they wanted to help create that action plan. So that group is going to be meeting on July 8th. If you want to join that group, send us a message on our website. We're very fortunate that Brandon Houston, who has joined our design team and runs the Collingwood Foundry, is going to be helping to host that session. The Institute is going to begin the process of seeding these ideas with some financial contributions, in addition to the all the other capitals we're bringing to this project: human capital, intellectual capital, etc. And we'd like to announce that the board has approved $2,500, which is on the table to help support an arts and culture strategy for this region. Never before have we worked on one together. And I invite anyone to put right in the chat what they might be willing to contribute to such a thing, because we will be embracing municipal leaders and business leaders and other leaders in the sectors to help move this strategy forward. Co-chairs have stepped forward. We have Susan Cook, Stuart Reed, and Dean Holland, who have agreed to co-chair that strategy. So lots of action there. The next 3, we want to encourage everyone to put up their hand and say they want action on that, and they're going to be part of that team. In our last event on June 10th, we had an excellent conversation about all kinds of ways that we could access new capital. And Marilyn Struthers produced a beautiful primer, which we'll be publishing on our website, about social finance. And so this next group needs to be identified so that we can collectively work on, okay, how do we pool our resources in a social investment strategy? And that can be anything from social bonds to a community foundation to supporting social enterprise and social procurement. So that is going to be a really interesting group, and hopefully we will be able to create a strategy for this region. The third theme came out loud and clear in part one when we talked about social innovation and resilience, and it was around getting communities more connected. And so we need to bring the sectors together more often and be working together. So we're hoping that this leadership group of speakers could get going on that. And the fourth theme is the importance of data. In the arts and culture presentation, we learned some really important statistics that will and should drive support for an arts and culture strategy, because it is so important to our tourism recovery. So that in a nutshell are the big themes that have been emerging, and we can continue the discussions on those through the chat as we go. But I'd also like to just briefly introduce our speakers for today in just a wee bit more detail. And so our first speaker is Mark Palmer. And Mark is the leading person on the Greenland group of companies. Mark is going to be sharing some ideas with us that are very important and build on our last November social innovation event. Carolyn Lertourneau has passed her baton to Kathy Innes from Beaver Valley Outreach. And Kathy, welcome. Kathy is the board chair, and so she brings the perspective of a leader of a board of directors who are in a much different position than perhaps their staff leaders. So we welcome Kathy Innes. David Green. David, as he mentioned, is the former chair of Georgian Triangle Lifelong Learning, and he is a founding board member of the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay. And Shirley Cavini, who is the deputy mayor of Meaford, and she's also been participating on their recovery task force and was a big participant in our social innovation event last November as well. So we welcome to an extraordinary panel. Over to you, Liz.
Just unmuting. Okay, thank you very much, Roz. I am going to stop the screen share and bring us back again to the group. So we're now going to move into the panelist conversation portion of our webinar today. And if you've participated with us in the last few sessions, the way it's worked in the past is we had the opportunity to hear from each of the panelist members, and people could ask questions in the chat. But mostly it was in presentation mode. We're going to try a different format today. We are going to open with a presentation from Mark Palmer, and then we have a series of questions which we'll put to the panelists as well as to the chat members, and invite participation in the chat and in conversation, kind of like we did in our opening question. And so I'm going to start by introducing Mark and ask you to start with your presentation. Mark, I'm going to just key up your slides to get started, and we'll go. This is a bit of an experiment, so don't hesitate to pause and ask a question or clarify things. Shirley, I know you also have some slides to share during the conversation part, so don't hesitate to say now's the time to show my slides if I'm not keying them up at the right moment. Let's just keep things informal, and hopefully we'll have a nice rich conversation about the issues around moving together and working together, moving forward in terms of COVID recovery and mapping our road to recovery. Okay, so I'm going to key up your slides. So I'm going to let you get started, and I'll be just 2 seconds, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Thank you, everybody, for having me. So I'm going to, spoiler alert, I'm an engineer, and I'm going to tackle this discussion from a tech sector perspective, but also looking at economic recovery and a benefit focus. Roz mentioned about getting communities more connected was one of the key themes, and that's what I'm going to target today on. So the first slide, if Liz is able to put it up, I'm just
coming right up.
Okay. So I just have a few slides here. The Greenland Group, we've been around for 25 years, and our brand is essentially a collaborative brand of SMEs, small, medium enterprises. But when you look at the theme about getting communities connected with NGOs and through partnerships, that's really what we've been doing for many years. Being in charge of Greenland for many years, we've been through the shocks of 9/11, the Great Recession. And what was interesting about this COVID was we were identified, we knew right away we're an essential workplace. So we needed to adapt right away. It just was like an overnight experience, getting our staff safe, protecting our clients. And we had to learn along the way. So, you know, engineers can be very adaptable and resilient, and that's what really put us to the test. So we're working offline, lots of us. I do have some staff in our buildings. We're coming back slowly, but we've learned a lot, and the community of Collingwood has been great to work with us and giving us direction. The next slide, please, Liz.
Yep, coming right up.
So when I mentioned about the collaborative, and this is where I'm going to be going with my last slide, but we did a very extensive project recently with the town of Collingwood, and it was sort of a reinforcement of this brand where partnerships work, and they work for the private sector. We are for profit. We're an engineering company, but we can work with universities, we can work with municipalities, we can work with startups. This was a project that we completed just recently. It was a 3-year project with some smart technologies. And it was a regional project because we had a couple smart, when I say smart, Internet of Things technologies dealing with water and flood protection, Safe Sump and Rain Grid, and they were key contractors through this project. So with the leadership of the town of Collingwood and Carrie McDonald, you see Carrie at the bottom slide there, she was our go-to public engagement person. So as we put this together, and you'll see this from our acting CAO, Sonia Skinner, it was a bit of a pioneer. We were pioneers in a way because we were embracing new technologies. We had the oversights of an engineering company on top of this, but there was concern. There was public safety involved. There was basements that could flood, and we had to really thread that through a partnership. And I'm pleased to announce that we're actually now in discussions with the City of Peterborough, the City of Vancouver, and we joined a recent accelerator up in Sudbury with the mining industry to do similar types of joint ventures with other companies. So what I wanted to show this slide is that as you move forward with these recovery strategies, I know for Collingwood, I'm aware of the report they produced on the May 19th. Phase 3 is the recovery open for business phase, and I believe we're not there yet to present that, but the next slide is really what is my lead in and why I wanted to say that. Okay, Liz? Okay, so this was about 4 years ago. It's kind of deja vu for me all over again. We prepared this, Martin Ridlow from the town of Collingwood, we sat down. This was prior to the previous slide when I showed the partnership model could work. What was a big picture? You know, let's be brave, let's be bold here. How could we really look at this region? And you'll see the top slide. We didn't call it the town of Collingwood. It was really a South Georgian Bay region. This is the same slide that we prepared 4 years ago. The blue boxes in the middle is that project that we just completed. And it was somewhat of a guinea pig that we could do this. We could pull this off with lots of partners and have success from it. But what I wanted to show is when you look at the outer boxes at the top corners with private investors, and then you look at accelerator teams to the right, this region, and I've been doing this for 35 years, is just ripe for the opportunity to really pull this together. And I look at COVID because COVID is, it is an opportunity in a way. It's a time to relearn and unpack old normal practices. So I really want today, and I'm just going to wrap up this slide, and I know we might bring it back later, is really this is an opportunity through COVID, a big picture thinking of, I'm hoping municipalities participating in this today and the other groups are not going to work in silos. We have to work together. We have to take the steps to pull us all together with their recovery plans because of COVID. And I think this type of big thinking vision, we need our councils to really connect and really look at this big picture thinking from a regional perspective. So Liz, thank you, and appreciate it.
That's great, Mark. I think one of the things that we heard on the last session around strategic investments, and while I'm talking, I'll just stop the screen share. We may bring this slide back up in a minute or two. But we did hear, you know, from a couple of the participants the last time around was a recognition that they were really shifting in two ways. One, who they were working with. So in the past, they would have stayed within their geographic boundaries and used those became kind of not walls, but you didn't pass over. Instead, they're looking out across the whole region and saying, who's good at this? How do we bring this together? It doesn't matter if we're inside or outside the boundaries. How do we all come together and invest in making, and then we can all benefit. Paying attention to and responding to the recognition that in some places you have to figure out the way that it works best in your local town or municipality. And we also heard on our first call that it's really important to respect those differences at times. The other thing we heard was people just changing from being like, if you were a government person, from being kind of an overseer, oversight role, to actually realizing that they had to just step into the arena, that they're one of the players, and that they're just truly on the platform with everybody else collaborating. That was a real shift for some people. And so that was a really important piece. And so on that note, I think we can probably move to our first question to the panelists. So thank you, Mark, for that. Great introduction, an example of some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm just going to find my question here. And just a reminder to our members who are listening, attendees who are listening in and on the chat, this is your chance to also respond to these questions. So I'll read the first question. I know Marilyn and or Christy will post it into the chat. What themes and action items from your community's recovery task force discussions or recommendations are things you believe are important for regional collaboration and action? So what themes and action items from your community's recovery task force discussions and recommendations are things that you believe are important for regional collaboration and action? And we added a little tag on that, what would make us the more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable as a region? So I'm gonna open up to whoever would like to go. Again, reminding people in the chat to post to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see your responses to those questions. Thanks for posting them over. And who'd like to start? Shirley. Okay, great.
Thanks, Liz. I'm always happy to start. And I'm so proud to be a resident of Meaford because I feel we are we're on the edge of your group, being, Wasaga, Collingwood, and Town of Blue Mountains, and Clearview, and Meaford. We're delighted that you include us. And yet we are also a proud part of Grey County and connected to Owen Sound. And that allows us to sort of be part of both areas in a sense, geographical boundaries, not playing into it. But from our recovery task force, we've been working with our Chamber of Commerce and our BIA and volunteers from various sectors, arts and culture being well represented. And we have come forward with a number of recommendations, but they're not necessarily all our own ideas. We've worked together with the Town of Blue Mountains, for example, on an e-commerce platform for businesses, which they sort of came up with that as their own brainchild, and we funded them in different ways, but we just felt it was important to get actions moving quickly, and if we could borrow from other communities, that was the ideal thing to do. And we've also been working with our businesses to get patios out for the restaurants, and we've used our CIP plan to fund fees for those, and we've been helping them to get their approvals done very quickly. So we're doing everything we can to support businesses with toolkits, and we've worked with Grey County being part of their business resiliency map, and they're open for business platforms, and just reaching out and taking advantage of the opportunity to say, what are you doing, what's working, and what can we learn from you as different communities are doing the same with us. So it's just been a wonderful opportunity to open up the pathways to reach out and work with organizations and municipalities and the county in ways that we have not before.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Yeah, Kathy, go ahead. Don't forget to unmute.
Yes, if I had to sort of summarize with one word, I would say that collaboration has been the most important thing for us. With our task force, we have, I guess, about 15 different people as part of the resource list. So we're hearing the perspective from many different kinds of businesses, community organizations, the churches, and all of these different points of view taken together give us a really good picture of what's going on in the community. And we've certainly been helped by the fact that other people are doing work that we can build on and adapt to our own use because of all these protocols that are coming out for how you have to open and how tourism is being affected. We run a treasure shop, which of course is a business, and how to open that. If we had to make up all these protocols in ourselves, it would take much more time and staff and volunteer time than we have, but the Village Association has come up with them and we've been able to adapt. So I think that collaboration and networking and listening to one another and helping each other find grants and different platforms for technology and assistance in those areas has been extremely helpful to us.
That's great. Thank you very much, Kathy. What else did we hear in terms of the pieces from your task force that you feel are important, that could be possible items that could be great for collaboration going forward? So I think we're recognizing both the behaviors, how we are doing it, collaborating, sharing, supporting each other, building on each other's experiences, and specific actions, also supporting businesses, learning from businesses directly, helping them connect with each other. David, did you?
Liz, there's a comment.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. There's a comment from Emily in the chat, and she was just saying, you know, taking the time to stop and reflect and listen to the residents, just increasing the engagement opportunities between businesses and residents, and then, you know, between just the residents and their neighbors, and how can we get all of those voices heard and engaged.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
David.
Well, that's probably actually, thanks. That's a nice segue into residents and into probably the couple of points I'd like to make. Roz asked me to speak on behalf from the philanthropic sector, which I initially didn't think that I was a philanthropist, or that that's what we all were. But when you actually delve into it and look further at what it means, obviously you come up with many, many different phrases and definitions. And I found a few in terms of promoting the welfare of others, love of humanity, obviously giving back, volunteering, and so on. So it's all about the whole time, talent, and treasure thing, which is what those residents that Emily mentions are doing. And one of the points, I think, and it focuses on very much in terms of an approach to philanthropy, if you like, is focusing on the quality of life. And the phrase they use is the well-being of individuals, societies guided by the goals and socio-cultural context in which the individual lives. Now, when I started thinking about that as it applies to our region and the residents we have, one thing I've observed in 12 years I've lived here is we have a tremendous base of people who contribute both financially but volunteer their time for so many things in so many areas, whether it's environmental, social, various clubs and organizations, and what have you. And in lifelong learning that I've been involved with, certainly that's been the case. So I think that's an important thing to note. But one of the other things that came out that I thought was interesting and it may be relevant is it talked about the difference between charity and philanthropy, which I thought was an interesting thing. Charity, it talks about relieving issues or pain around a specific social problem, which is sort of more like the Band-Aid approach, if you like. Whereas philanthropy often attempts to address the root cause of the problem and is more of a long-term view. And I think that's maybe an interesting approach or point of view we need to look at in terms of looking at root cause of some of the issues as against just Band-Aiding. Obviously, you need to continue to Band-Aid and fund and support. But I think that's a platform, if you like, that I'd like to stand on with some of the other points that we talk about. The other thing I think that we have to consider is how do we tap into that wealth of talent we have in this Southern Georgian Bay region more specifically. Obviously, people will volunteer and contribute and so on, but there's a lot of people who can bring a lot to the table if you can somehow capture that information. I know we have I believe we started a volunteer database, volunteer connection, I think it's called, through Community Connections. But again, I don't know how that's working. And the ability to capture more information about people, about those residents, about what they could give back, and be able to channel some of that and maybe build teams would be well worth doing. The other point I'd like to make is that there's a changing and growing population as well over the next few years. And one of the things, I mean, it's both, there's a lot of people retiring earlier, there's a younger, more families. I think there's different needs and expectations. So from a resiliency and sustainability standpoint, how do we make sure that that next generation of people that are coming in, and certainly recent examples of youth involvement in some of the current issues, I'll tell you, is pretty awesome and incredible to see. But again, how do we make sure that they be part of that sustainability? So lots more to talk about, but that's just a starting point from what I think we need to consider as residents and volunteers.
Hey, thanks, David. And the theme around youth has come up a number of times. It's actually one of those things when I went back and reread all the notes from our past sessions in preparation for today, it was an area that I made a note about in terms of how we figure out how we're going to follow up on that piece, because I think it's critical, because obviously they're demonstrating lots of different things that have been possible, even with some of the present protests and marches that we've seen recently. All of that, there's a lot of voices that are ready to be heard at the table, and finding some ways to get those included in this work is important. Mark, yeah, I noticed you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, as we get back to that comment I made about refocusing our communities to be more connected. And again, I'm focusing on Collingwood's phase 3. This is the open for business recovery phase, which is a longer term focus. We found out that Supply Chain Canada, there was an open survey at time of COVID that 70% of the respondents realized there was disruption in their supply chains. And I think, again, I get back to that comment, it's a catalytic opportunity, COVID, for all of us, because it's time to repack and, learn again, repack, pack again. What is our supply chain needs in the community? And supply chain is, it's not just tech, it's not just investment, it's also social capital with all these other groups that are participating. So I'm hoping, and I'm a big regional greater good type of person, that we need to really connect these phase 3s, because I think looking forward, you hear somebody said, well, in another 8 years, we'll have another similar situation. It's alarming when you hear about these, this is the new normal. So supply chains are very critical to this area. And I think this is an opportunity we need to start talking about it and make those linkages that if, and hopefully not, this does happen again, it's going to be a long haul getting out of this, I know. So it is time to talk about supply chains, I think, from my side as a business seers.
Right. And it's interesting. I think one of the things that I find interesting about this conversation is that there's ways for bringing perspectives and ways of framing, like as you described, to unpack, relook, reorganize, repack. I mean, there's some language there and some processes that as an engineer and as ways of doing things like the supply chain work, can we take that thinking and apply it to the broad mix of all the elements? Because it does impact. It's not just about whether your widgets are arriving at the right time, but how are we able to connect with each other? What impact is our social distancing having on our patterns of interaction? And what difference will that make in terms of how we connect with each other as people and as a region to solve our problems? So great insights there. So first Shirley and then David.
Thanks, Liz. And I'm so happy to hear all the panelists and our attendees too today talking about collaboration, because Meaford has just adopted a new economic development strategy that we've been working on for about 1.5 years. And my favorite line in the whole very long document is, collaboration is the new leadership. And I so strongly believe that to be true, and that can be just locally between residents and government. It can be between organizations, and certainly it can be between communities and between counties and above that and beyond. So it is certainly a focus of mine, and it sounds like it's going to be a focus here as well. And I'm wondering, Liz, would this be a good time to show the slides from Meaford?
Okay,
Thanks
there we
very
go.
much.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Yes.
Apologies.
That's great, Liz. Thank you. And as we talk about our recovery task force, this is a proposal that has been developed by a sub-working team of our group that we're really quite excited about. And if anyone's familiar with Meaford, you'll recognize this as our Market Square. The big building on the left is our Meaford Hall, and I hope you've all been there. We've had performers the likes of Jan Arden and Jesse Cook and Burton Cummings last fall, so just an amazing opera house upstairs. On the far right is our our outdoor concert hall, where we have live concerts over the summer. And in the center, next to Sykes Street, there is our Red Big Apple, our information center. So we feel this space is ideal as an event space. And we're looking forward to making some changes to the current configuration of the Market Square. Ready for slide 2, Liz? So currently, certainly as we've been discussing, and we're all aware right now, as people have been isolating and staying in their homes and been really reluctant to re-engage in their communities and in our economy, we've been thinking about how to encourage people to come out and to come back to our downtowns and to help them feel comfortable with, of course, social distancing and all those things in place. Social isolation and mental health issues certainly are impacting people as they have been locked down for some time. Slide 3, please. So we feel that this event space in our Market Square could really help to drive our immediate economic recovery by getting people down and getting them recognizing what businesses are open and getting them feeling comfortable with what our business owners are offering and getting them back into the shops and spending their money. So we hope to create this incentive to encourage people to do that. And also, as we're ready, to again attract tourism to our downtown. And ready for slide 5. So this is our plan. What we hope to do is to take the 2 rows of parking spaces closest to Sykes Street or Highway 26 and create an area with picnic tables that will be delineated by planters, and they will certainly be properly distanced, and they will be cleaned and sanitized at the times that are recommended by our local health unit, by either the businesses or by volunteers. The 3 pinkish circles are meant for performer areas. Right now, performers are not allowed to sing or dance, but they can play. So that would be what would happen in the meantime until they're allowed to actually sing again. And we would have performances probably 4 or so times a week. And people could pick up meals at the restaurants, which are just across Sykes Street, and come over and sit down at the picnic tables and dine and listen to the music. And we're working on getting washrooms open in Meaford Hall, because right now washrooms are a huge issue. And I'm sure a lot of you can identify this as you think about where you might go. You have to think that there are no public washrooms open at this point in time. And so we're working through the procedures of how we can do that. And we feel that having public washrooms open will actually attract people downtown, because we're a seniors community and many folks just aren't comfortable going out if they know there's no available washroom. And ready for slide 12. So this really is a demonstration of the power of a public space. And we feel that our Market Square is prime to deliver a lot of what is suggested here in terms of attracting people. And we already have our farmers market happening there this summer, and along with the event space and the opportunity to bring meals in and dine, and there's still space to park and host events as restrictions permit. That we just feel this is a proposal that we can make happen with a lot of the resources that we already have. We're excited about it. We're looking forward to it. And that has been a big part of our recovery discussion. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share what Meaford is working on today.
You know, when I saw those slides initially, I was thinking, oh, wouldn't it be great if there was some kind of interesting, you know, square to square pathway, kind of like the apple pie, tour that you can do, and figuring out something where you're building on people's different squares with each one's having different focus. It's a way to really cross connect. Could be really interesting. So thank you for sharing that.
No,
Okay.
that's a great idea.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next question. We have a number of them here today. One of the questions I just want as a follow-up to what we were just talking about, is there something that's possible now in this period where we're starting to emerge out of at least the first phase, the first sort of wave of COVID? Is there something that's possible now that wasn't possible before? What just comes to mind? Don't overthink it. Like, is there just something that pops in? Let's have that short conversation. And again, into the chat, attendees, are there things that seem possible now that weren't before?
So Liz, I might just throw in a couple of things from the chat. Lee Graves points out that she'd like to see municipalities show more robust support for charities and nonprofits, and really recognizing the kind of volunteer labor that people contribute to community, but feels that often councils are unwilling to actively engage because they don't have a lot of control over how that goes. Janet Fairbridge points out that building a culture of philanthropy is really, really important. She riffs off the point that time, talent, and treasure. So those are areas that I see in the chat people are looking for growing forward on.
Okay, thank you very much, Marilyn. Any other comments from the panelists here in terms of something that feels possible now that wasn't before? Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think your last session, His Worship Mayor Saunderson was on, and he may have mentioned about a UN Sustainability Habitat Conference that's underway. I'm on the committee with Councillor Jeffrey and then His Worship and the CAO, and it was interesting when we got all together. There are the 3 pillars for Sustainable Development Goals. This is an international conference to promote small towns on their initiatives underway, and this was underway before COVID. But we were able, with the group out of the UN, and this is people around the world, to introduce a post-COVID world theme to it. So I guess stay tuned. We're still in the works to figure out when this is going to happen and how it's going to happen. But I think with that exposure and attention to the region, and it's not just, again, it's Collingwood in Collingwood, but it's a regional conference to promote this region. So I think that's something new that really we could take advantage of it. And the United Nations watching this, I think it's a huge opportunity for this region to work together as part of that. So thanks.
That's very exciting. Great news. And you'll have to keep us posted so that we can include updates in the newsletter from the Institute. If there are elements that are coming or there's opportunities, or even if you see as we start to move forward with our arts and culture strategy, with the strategic investments, with obviously sustainability work overall in terms of looking at building a resilient and responsive region, those things are going to be key. And so, I think there'll be elements that will really make sense as we start working forward on all of these items. Okay. Yeah, David, and then Christy.
Yes, I think Janet's point about building, more, as I say, I think we already are somewhat of a philanthropic region and community. The question is, what do we do to build more of the culture around it? I think on the question about what's possible that wasn't before, a couple of thoughts I put down here. The one thing is maybe more collaboration and cooperation between the governments, the various levels of government, business, arts, community, or local community organizations, and social services. I think, maybe a better understanding of the needs and opportunities that various organizations have because of the pandemic, but hopefully the crisis and actions taken because of it might well lead to a better understanding and perhaps more collaboration. From a business standpoint, I think a lot of people obviously finding some of the weaknesses and vulnerabilities has obviously not been pleasant in many cases, but perhaps lots of lessons to learn. And I'm sure Mark can probably comment on that much better than I can, but certainly from some of my exposure to some past businesses, I know that's the case. He made the point about supply chains. I think that whole relationship with partners, suppliers, customers, support groups, associations, and so on is going to be very different, because you found some weaknesses, you found some good things, some bad things, and so the future may well lead you to develop different relationships, or at least be able to monitor them differently. I think the whole opportunity to take advantage of online, the digital world, for many people who've discovered e-commerce, and that it really works, and that it's something that, you know, depending on their products and how they do it. I think examples like Brandon, you know, putting together the Collingwood Commons is an excellent example of collaboration and bringing something to the table that can help the community. And so I think that, plus customers, I think in general, I commented before about people being more comfortable with technology. I think they're probably more e-commerce friendly as well now in some cases, although maybe they've blown their budgets a lot on Amazon and other things. I think one good example of that what lessons learned is the whole thing of restaurants and takeout. I think a lot of restaurants and people I've talked to have suddenly discovered that this takeout business is actually a pretty good deal, and that they can in fact build that into their future model more than perhaps they used to. And finally on that, I think there's an increased focus needed on the people realize that you need local support and regional support of residents, the weekenders, the part-timers. I mean, we've got 100,000 people in the region, and a lot of businesses, of course, count on the tourism and your weekenders, people visiting, and then, of course, count on some support during the shoulder seasons. And I think maybe there's an opportunity to do something with some sort of programs and incentives to make sure the local regional residents are much more part of the equation going forward than perhaps they were before. And finally, just on arts and culture, I think there's a real opportunity where people have now discovered, you know, online shows, tours of anywhere in the world, concerts, museums, what have you. I think that might, in the future, might well become part of the mix. Even though live is better, it's still, as I mentioned, with lifelong learning, I think it will become much more part of the mix in the future. And perhaps that's a way to do cross-regional promotion, where you can now bring things together. And even if in a promo sense from Meaford Hall and Theatre Collingwood and wherever else, to be able to promote things across the region. So those are a few thoughts on the what might be different.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, David. Christy?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. So I just want to pick up a couple of themes in the chat, one of which is just this idea that the municipalities and some of the government agencies are reducing their bylaws and their restrictions to support businesses and to support organizations in being able to bring forward their ideas and their ways of connecting with their customers. So for example, being able to move your patios out onto the street in many of the municipalities, or for me in the food business, you know, labeling requirements and sort of regulations have really relaxed to offer small producers the opportunity to bring food to the communities more quickly and without having so many constraints. And another thing I just wanted to bring up too is opportunities that are emerging, right? So yes, these regulations and these bylaws are changing, so let's take advantage of those opportunities, but also anti-racism, and what are we going to do moving forward to make sure that we're not losing the opportunity to include that conversation. And it's been posed to the panelists if anyone would be willing to share if there's any conversation or any talk in your regions or in your areas of business around a solution or a light being shined on these areas.
Okay. Does anybody want to comment on that question?
You know, I think I'll comment. I think it's just something to bring into people's awareness. I come from a mixed race family, and I think, you know, just even putting that question and just bringing that to the surface right now and letting it have some tension and letting people just kind of like percolate, like, oh shoot, what are we going to do? How are we going to make sure that we haven't, dismissed this very important emerging situation and opportunity. So just wanted to
I know
make sure
David
it got put out there.
and then Shirley wanted to respond. I appreciate you putting that in there, Christy. David and then Shirley.
Thank you. And I think it's really in how we welcome newcomers. Our Grey County has a wonderful program for doing that and for helping immigrants feel at home in the community and helping them in any way that that is needed, because I think we have to face the realization that we need these immigrants to enter our workforce. Our businesses are going to need them as they ramp back up and they start to rehire. We're going to be back in the position that we were 6 months ago, where every business is looking for staff. And I think we have to recognize how important these immigrants are to us and how we're going to welcome them. And just to add to the question, what I've noticed in Meaford is a real willingness for businesses to support each other. The competitiveness seems to have disappeared, and business owners are just saying, well, I've got lots of sanitizer, and what have you got there? What can you get that I may be able to use? And because everybody just wants their business to survive, and they want the rest of the businesses in the communities to survive. And I just found that is really amazing that they're stepping forward and working together in those ways.
That's awesome. David.
Yes, on the point in terms of the racial biases and all that sort of thing, I think there's a point about inclusiveness that's made, and I think it's part of, at least I'm suggesting that it's part of the bigger mix of just inclusiveness and recognizing the various issues. If you like, I start by saying sort of socioeconomic strata that we have in the region. I mean, for a lot of people, the issues of whether it's racial or homelessness or youth at risk and so on, is not something that's necessarily as obvious. It's a GTA problem, not something in our little community, and that's not the case for sure. I think also acknowledging that there are cultural and racial issues in the region, although as maybe not as obvious, we have to certainly consider them in all we do, and probably more so in the future. And I think the point has been made again about youth, and I made the point before about sustainability and the youth of the future generation. I think some of these issues are going to continue, and that the next generation will certainly continue to keep them alive. I think the other point about any of this inclusiveness is ensuring that we recognize that everything has something they could contribute to our region and to society, whether they're disabled, homeless, racial, cultural, whatever the issue is, young, old, everybody would like to be able to contribute. So the question is, how can we create an environment that helps them help themselves and be able to contribute to society and economic growth? Hard to do in the current situation. If you talk about jobs, you talk about the ability to contribute. I mean, that's with the current situation and less jobs and companies that are scaling up, with less people, it's going to be more of a challenge. But it is something I think we need to think about more to be able to help people to help themselves. A bit about the teach a man to fish rather than give him a fish kind of approach. Mm-hmm. That's just some thoughts on that topic.
Okay, thank you, David. I think one of the things that I believe in, and I could build on, I think, some comments that Mark made earlier on that idea of, unpacking your everyday practices and how you do things, examining them for how effective they are, and then repacking them. It's often in our day-to-day practices that elements of systemic racism and oppression are held. And it's those patterns of interaction in our day-to-day ways of doing things that have consistently led to some of the practices we've seen around police brutality in particular. And I think we've seen some interesting responses already in this region pre-COVID with, for instance, the creation of an emergency response team that allows a social worker or a nurse with psychiatric skills to attend with an OPP officer, and that's administered out of the Collingwood General and Marine Hospital and the OPP detachment in Collingwood. So we I think there's some tuning in and some recognition around some of those issues, and some interesting responses. And we've seen some marches in the area and people wanting to start to speak up about these things. I think like the shining of the light in on those cracks, these are all elements that we can start to really attend to from an inclusive point of view. I agree. But also to confront where we may see existing practices that are oppressive or racist and start to find better and more participatory ways of working with each other. So I'll leave it at there. Christy, you want to comment, and then I think we'll move on to our next question.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring to attention Thomas Vincent. He's actually put his hand up, and I'm wondering if we have if we can have a chance to allow him to talk. He's posted in the chat, but he's also raised his hand. So I know I think there's a way for us to allow him to speak. I
don't know how to make attendees able to participate.
Okay, well then we can just
bring... I can do that.
Yeah.
Let me just find him on the attendees list.
Just while Karen is doing that, we have also a comment from, I just went up too far here.
Okay,
Emily.
Thomas is unmuted now.
Comment from Emily suggesting one of the ways forward here would be to map community assets and residents' gifts to really systematically find out who we've got in the community and what they might have to offer. And I guess if you create a broad framework there, you would catch lots of work around inclusion.
Okay, thank you very much, Marilyn. And Thomas, I understand you're now able to participate. So please share your comments.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Super. I think that I just wanted to talk about a success in looking at a problem. And I started the Syrian Family Foundation here in Collingwood, and about 4 years ago. And we've brought in, I think, 8 families now. 7 or 8, I'm sorry. And, you know, we've raised money, probably raised at least $150,000 from the community, galvanized the community about an issue, starting from nothing. And we have probably, well, I know we have definitely well over 50, somewhere in the region, 50, 60 volunteers who have come to the plate and worked with these families. Most of them didn't speak English when they came, but just the organization of these families to make them successful in a new country, and then contributing, you know, because obviously they've all gone out and they've got jobs. I mean, it's just an absolutely tremendous success story. So all of these issues we're talking about, you know, are solvable, and some of them we have to take them in very small steps when we're working. And some of them are a lot larger than what we're doing with the Syrian Family Foundation. But you saw my note on the right-hand side about the collaboration that is needed for the three. From my focus, I look at attainable housing, and we won't get into that, you know, in any great detail right now, but I'm working on a number of projects, but we need to have collaboration in the South Georgian Bay area. The arts and culture strategy that, you know, we talked about at the last conference call, and I think it's just critical to this region to get the municipalities collaborating together. And we obviously, through CASE, want to create a center for the region, not for Collingwood, just for the region and all the municipalities that we've talked about. And then, you know, as David mentioned, I mean, we all know we have such a tremendous intellectual capital group in Collingwood in the PMA. And on top of that, I think that we have a significant amount of investment capital. So with this COVID crisis, from my point of view, is I really think the municipalities should be encouraged to put together funding and get it matched out there by the private sector, who want to make sure that we survive properly or can survive after COVID, and help our businesses in some way, shape, or form. So those are some comments on the success and some of the things that we need to look at.
That's great, Tom. Thank you very much for contributing your comments today. All right, so we have another question, and I think we have some time. So we're going to go to that next question, and we're going to post that over also into the chat. The question is, if you could describe an ideal approach or solution, and we've heard some of these come up already, so don't hesitate to reiterate some of the things you think are important. So if you could describe an ideal approach or solution that would align objectives, pool resources, and accelerate collective action as a region, what would it be? It seems like these are really good leverage points. Like, all right, Mark.
So just recently, Collingwood Council, and I know Councillor Hamlin can update the TSIGB team, they passed unanimously a resolution to look into establishing a community foundation for this region. I've been fortunate. John Wilkinson, the former part of the McGuinty government, he was the chair of the Stratford Perth County Foundation. So I've had the pleasure to be part of that once in a while. And it's an exciting thing, I think, that's happening. So I understand staff from Collingwood are going back to prepare a report for council. So I think, as just to strengthen on what Tom just mentioned, keep your eye on that, because that's very inclusive for not only the private industry, but also bringing in United Way and other groups, that there is funding mechanisms through that investment of social businesses to be involved. And there's been some great practices and achievements, and Stratford has done a wonderful job in that area, Perth County. So again, that's keep your eye on that. That's an ideal solution. I think that really fits into some of the things we've been talking about today. So.
Okay, that's great.
Great.
Who else? What other ideas have we got that we think are ideal solutions moving forward? Shirley.
Thanks very much, Liz. I think there's a tremendous amount to be gained by working together as a region. And I've seen this approach be very successful. Tom mentioned attainable housing. I was part of the Southern Georgian Bay Workforce Task Force, which brought representatives together from the region. And interestingly enough, even though I am an elected official, other elected officials, it really wasn't a political group. It was a group of volunteers who came together to raise the funding, to make the action happen of hiring a consultant to create a report on attainable housing. And that report has been widely distributed and presented, and is now actionable in Thornbury with their purchase of the Foodland property and housing going forward. And all of that happened really within a period of 2.5 years. And we all know, unfortunately, it takes governments much longer to get things done. So building upon that success, I think there's great opportunity to move forward and do something similar with arts and culture in bringing interested and capable representatives together from this region.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other ideas or suggestions? Yeah, sure, David.
Yeah, I think there's some of this is already happening, and it's been mentioned already. But I think the opportunity to put together some sort of working groups to look at some of the various initiatives and issues. And I mentioned before about the whole thing about root cause. And I think in the corporate world, I mean, it's a big deal. And I went through a lot of time spent with doing what some of you may know, Kaizens and continuous improvement processes. And one of them is the whole thing called 5 whys. And I think it's interesting how when you start to ask the question and ask why every time, you know, why do we have this? Why do we have that? You start to get down to some of the root causes and the basics where we can make change. And that's where the funding, the philanthropy, the collaboration and so on can start to make a difference when you can make changes that will have longer term impact. So I think that's important. So I think getting at some of those issues, and I think having some working groups that have cross-sectoral representation, government, NGOs, community groups, and including, you know, obviously people tapping into that wealth of talent that we have who could bring something to the table on a particular issue around, whether that is on social initiatives, infrastructure, business, arts and culture, housing, transportation, etc. So I think that's important, and having that group be somewhat objective. I understand there's working groups as part of some of the government, the municipal and regional government organizations, but perhaps something that includes people that sort of drive it. It's almost like an independent body that sort of takes it, looks at it independently, and can bring back, can look at it, analyze it, identify the issues, do a report out, share it with people, and then bring it back to have some, hopefully report it out and get some results. So I think there's some opportunity to do that in the region, and to do it in a manageable and a sustainable process of some sort.
Kathy.
Yes, I agree with that kind of approach, but I think we need to find some champions. I think that this particular group has to be some big picture people who can look at the approach across the whole region, and who are enthusiastic enough to put together something that doesn't become just another layer of community, but actually gains the respect of government and whatever other areas like business, so that they have some, not power exactly, but so that the recommendations that they might come up with would be received as being viable and worth looking at. A lot of us have our smaller focus and aren't necessarily able to step out of that into the bigger picture. But maybe once that committee got going, there could be smaller groups clustered around the 4 pillars that your institute has identified, and would be able to tap in at that level rather than the big picture level. I think one of the opportunities that we have as a result of COVID is a new kind of accessibility that hasn't existed before. Meetings like this have become the norm rather than the limitations of face-to-face meetings all the time. And so people are much more comfortable exchanging ideas in this type of format. And that might prove useful going forward. I also think that opportunities like engaging in designations like youth-friendly communities and accessible for seniors kinds of communities, these are all things that go across communities. And if you get communities that are working together on these various items, you already have something in common that can be built upon.
A great group of suggestions. You've just been gathering things up all through this call, and woo, that was great. I'm glad it was recorded. I'm not sure I caught every single one of those items, so thank you very much for that, Kathy. That was terrific. It reminded me about the idea that when we're working in a really large system that has all these different elements to it, we always have to be paying attention to the parts, the whole, and the greater whole, and how they're cross-relating to each other. At different layers. So it sort of goes this way and it goes this way and it goes kind of like this and it goes kind of like that. If you're on the video, you can see that. If you weren't on video, you wouldn't be able to see what that was about. But I think that there's some real elements to that. So that's really helpful. Okay, I think we had one more question there, and I'm looking at the time, 10:02. So let's move ahead now to our final segment here, which is, if we were going to cast back, and I think actually Kathy just did a lovely job of pulling together some great threads and coming up with some very concrete suggestions. So I'm sure that there are some others out there that have been ruminating over these things over the course of this call. So if I was going to ask, what actions from today that you've heard suggested so far, what are the ones that stand out for you as ones where we should begin to take action on? So I'm going to put that to our panelists here. So that may just be some reiterating, but there may be some other things we want to pull up and focus on. And then also in the chat. So thinking back over the things we've talked about, what are the actions from today that really stand out for you as ones where we should begin to take next steps? Because those are the things we're going to bring to a group of people who've been involved in this so far, and others who might want to get involved as we go forward, to be framing what we might start to do in the fall going forward as an institute, working on these issues collaboratively. So who wants to start?
Okay.
Okay, Shirley.
Thanks, Liz. I'll start. And thinking of how to move forward and recognizing that we have, you know, a tremendous number of assets, thinking, you know, Meaford Hall and the Simcoe Street Theatre and so on, and kind of making a list of the cultural assets that we have. And then from that, thinking of getting the buy-in from each one of those who you'll want at your table, and then approaching people who are connected with each of those facilities to start to build a group who will be like-minded and potentially willing to work together. I mean, the group will probably start with, you know, some goals, and we'll build their roles and responsibilities and their vision and mission, and vision, mission, and all of those sorts of things, and eventually will evolve into a strong regional group. But I think, you know, sometimes you have to start on the smallish side and build from there, and then determine how it's going to be financed and where the funding is going to come from and what capabilities that allows you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, David.
Yeah, I think, you know, based on my comments about working groups and collaboration and cooperation, and if you put something together, and what Shirley just talked about, I think there's three things. First of all, you need to have the will to want to do something. Political, the particular sector involved, or the issue, the community, and a regional focus. Think regional and act regional. I think you need a clearly defined mandate and some timing and expectations around that, what resources are available to make that, to make some of those things happen. You need to identify the people you want to bring to the table. And I mentioned before, you need a good cross-section, including some of those, you know, not directly those philanthropic sort of people who will come and bring some talent to the table that may be able to contribute from their background in whatever it was, finance, marketing, communications, CEOs of companies, what have you. And finally, I think the important thing is you need some indication that the results and recommendations will be considered and acted upon. And we all know of lots of things that have been done, reports and hundreds of thousands of dollars spent, and they sit on the shelf. And I think to the point that you made, you know, regular reporting, and I noticed, and in fact, Yvonne mentioned it in one of her chat items, regular reporting, even small items to keep it going, keep people informed, not only to the community, but to councils and various stakeholders in the initiatives is critical. So those are, you know, some things that we need to do and put the rules around moving some of these things forward, perhaps.
Okay, Christy.
There's some things in the chat. So looking to the Collingwood Vision 2020 model as a way to work in a regional context was suggested. Actively working on a community foundation together with investigation of a social planning council to inform on the social issues. Also suggesting that we work on exploring Wi-Fi and device access where profit and not-for-profit and the government sectors can all come together to increase access. Yeah, so those are some of the things that showed up in the chat.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other suggestions? I think some of the things that I heard, and sort of riffing a little bit off of David, as well as Kathy and Shirley, this idea of having the regional, either they're working groups or tables. We know that there's a group that's come together, a round table around social services. And I think we'll probably see some kind of working group emerge out of that arts and culture strategy. There's, I think, a business roundtable. I don't know, Roz, if you want to jump in here with me, because we're getting close to end here, to wrap up some of those things. But it definitely feels like that's a piece, and finding some way for municipalities themselves to be sharing with one another, or for us to work as an institute with others to figure out how that works in a cross-sectoral way might be very interesting going forward in terms of continuing holding both the importance of the local, which I think I heard today, as well as attending to the regional at the same time. It's kind of like Kathy's idea about, or sorry, Shirley's comments about how businesses were cooperating. There's kind of like a competition, cooperation, tension, and that when we hold both and find ways to be working with both and coordinating ways effectively, we're better at it. So as we're coming up on time, I'm just gonna ask Roz to also come in with me here to share about what's happening next and any other final reflections from our conversation today. You need to unmute, Roz.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to thank our great facilitation team, Liz and Marilyn and Christy. We couldn't have done it without you. All the speakers, you have given us some extraordinary things to think about. This is a moment in time where thinking big and thinking bold is extremely important. We do have an opportunity to come out of this better than we went into it. And the challenges require, I think, a multi-sector approach. So to hear that there's a business roundtable, great. To hear that there's a social services roundtable, great. To hear that there might be an arts and culture roundtable, terrific. The magic comes together when you bring them together, because that's where the new ideas will develop. And so it's a bit of a weaving together of these things. And if we could find 1, 2, 3 objectives that cut across all those sectors, that's where our sweet spot is. So I just wanted to thank the facilitators and speakers, also the design team who has come up with this amazing series. Thank you so much. And all of you who have devoted, if this is your first time, thank you very much, an hour and a half, and some of you that ×4 to really take these ideas to the next level. So what the Institute will do is we will continue with the working group who have identified themselves for the arts and culture strategy. We will pull a leadership team together from these 4 session speakers plus others who could talk about that big picture. We will reach out to organizations who are doing work in our other pillars that we haven't had a deep dive conversation on. And we'll make sure that we're always bringing the 4 sectors together, no matter what we're talking about, so that we get the best ideas, we align the objectives, and we get the best investment. And I guess the last thing I'll say, because there's so many other good ideas that came up today, you know, the importance of data was repeated, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now talk about building back better. That would be awesome to explore what role we could all play in that. The culture of philanthropy was mentioned, youth strategies and how we'll ensure that our region attracts and retains and nurtures. You know, age-friendly, if that's code for senior strategy, we all need one. So, you know, we need to be thinking about these things in a fun, creative, and collaborative way. And this session is no different than the other 3. We've all gotten to know each other better. We've built that trust. And so let's keep it going. July 8th is the next meeting for arts and culture. If anybody wants to attend, again, put it in the chat. We'll get back in touch with you. And until then, spend the whole summer looking at all of the important information that we've shared with each other over these last 4 sessions. It's all going to go up on our website all through July. You'll have a lot of time to think about it, and then let's be ready to act together in September. So thanks to everyone. I hope I've touched base on all that I was supposed to do.
You did a great job wrapping up, Roz, and a big thank you to everyone who's been with us on the call and contributing in the chat. I've been seeing additional things coming in, so don't worry, we haven't lost those ideas. We're paying attention, and we'll have them all recorded as part of the summary. Just final thank you to our colleague Karen Clegg, who has been just a real gem in helping us host these webinars and providing all of the recordings and things afterwards and helping us prepare appropriately and promoting it. So thanks very much to Karen Clegg Winnipeg and the town of Collingwood for hosting us here today, and to our other partners, really important piece of work. So with that, I think we'll say thank you very much, and watch for updates either through our newsletter, on the website, posting on our social media streams, and we will be in touch with you about what's happening next. So thanks very much, and great ideas moving forward. We've got lots to work on, lots of actions to take.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.